Hi, and welcome to section 4, Locating Elements for Test Development with the Selenium WebDriver. We learned a lot in a previous section about understanding the architecture of WebDriver for interacting the browser drivers through API. Then we have learned configuration of Selenium WebDriver with Java project. Later we worked on different drivers such as Firefox, profile settings, Chrome option, and set up executable file for Internet Explorer driver for test execution. In this section, we'll look at locating elements for test development with Selenium WebDriver. We will learn how to find elements on the page using the WebDriver API command for test development. In this section, we are going to take a look at finding elements on the page by their ID, name, class name, CSS selector, link text, and partial link text, tag name and XPath using Selenium WebDriver API commands. Later, we will learn about procedure for elements to appear on the page. Let's start with the first video of this section. The goal of this video is to start with different types of WebDriver API command and then finding an element on this page by its ID and name using these Selenium WebDriver API commands. In this video, let's begin with the WebDriver API commands and using these commands to find an element on the page by its ID and name. Let's start with the WebDriver API commands. For finding elements on the page, there are different types of WebDriver API commands available in the WebDriver architecture driver component. We begin with the helper commands to find elements on the page. The downside of helper commands method is if something changes, we need to change the entire method that we are using to find the element for test development. Such helper methods can increase maintenance costs. To reduce the maintenance costs, the other approach is to find element on the page is using generic commands to find elements. Let's look at finding elements by ID. Finding elements by ID is one of the easiest way. Find element by ID and find elements by ID methods are the helper methods, which directly pass the ID attribute value to these helper methods. Find element by ID method call returns web element object and find elements by ID method calls return collections of web element objects. The generic approach is find elements by using find element method. Pass by abstract class and call the ID static method of this find element generic method. Find element method calls return web element object and find elements method calls return collections of web elements objects. Open Eclipse IDE, create a Java class under created Java project and paste the code. Let's find an element on the page using the find elements by ID helper method. The find element method calls return a web element object on successful search and we can perform actions on these elements. Before this, we used the find elements by ID method which returns collection of web element objects. This is how it looks in the Eclipse IDE with the pasted code. Now you can run the code by right-clicking on the code or Java file name and choose Run as JUnit test. Let's find an element on the page using find element generic method. Pass by abstract class and call the ID static method. The find element method calls return a web element object on successful search and we can perform actions on this element. Before this, we used find elements method which returns collections of web element objects. This is how it looks in the Eclipse IDE with pasted code. Now you can run the code by right-clicking on the code or Java file name and choose Run as JUnit test. Let's look at finding elements by name. Finding elements by name is also one of the easiest way. Find element by name and find elements by name methods are the helper methods which directly pass the name attribute value to these helper methods. Find element by name method calls return a web element object and find elements by name method calls return collection of web element objects. The generic approach is to find elements using find element method. Pass by abstract class and call the name static method to the find element generic method. Find element method calls return web element object. The find elements method calls return collections of web element objects. Let's find element on the page using the find element by name helper method. The findElement method calls return a web element object on successful search, and we can perform actions on this element. Before this, we use findElementsByName method, which returns collection of web element objects. This is how it looks like in the Eclipse IDE with pasted code. Now you can run the code by right-clicking on the code or Java file name and choose Run as TestNG test. Let's find an element on the page using findElement generic method. Pass by abstract class and call the name static method. The findElement method calls return a web element object on successful search, and we can perform actions on these elements. Before this, we used the findElements method, which returns collection of web element objects. This is how it looks in the Eclipse IDE with pasted code.